This is part 2 of my interview with David Schroeder of Dino Eggs fame, as I ask him a few more technical questions about creating the game. Well, one of the things that we should start from the beginning. Where did you get your education?
Well, went to high school in Ohio, my hometown, Sydney, Ohio. Went to college at Yale University. Um, Majored in music, composition, and music, and has also been an interest in my life.
I know music is a very large part of your life now.
And in college, there were not yet. I went to college from 73 to 77, graduated in 77. I took one computer course, and there were not home computers yet, and I got the worst grade of my college career in that course, primarily because I turned all of the programming assignments into trying to create little games on the graphically anemic systems that we were using then.
What computers were you using at that school?
Oh my gosh.
Do you remember?
We had to load the information in with reels of magnetic tape. It's on the tip of my tongue what it was, but I don't know if I'll be able to remember it. PDP 111 or PDP 110. It was something. It was
a huge machine.
And it was a big advance at that time that we didn't have to do punch cards, that we could do the magnetic tape. But as I say, it was all just text graphics on a screen moving very slowly. And I made attempts to get little graphic movement going by manipulating the text, which is one of the very, very early forms of games when the Apple came out, was to use the text mode with text characters, slanted lines, and X's and things to create
ASCII characters, yeah.
Yeah, ASCII character animation, right.
Well, I guess you're lucky, actually, that you had a screen. Some of the early programmers would not even have a screen. They'd have a printer that would print out the output.
That's right. And, there were some games there that just ate up a lot of paper because each stage of the game was just another thing that would print out.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that system, and I think it was PDE something, had some displays where it did display pixel by pixel, but there was not a programming access to that pixel by pixel mode.
Right.
Or at least not at the level that in our course we were being taught. And we learned Fortran, and we learned Lisp, which was an early kind of artificial intelligence language processing language, Fortran, and some other language that I forget.
Okay, that's amazing, and that stuck with you for some reason.
I was very, very interested in the course. Artificial intelligence, understanding how people communicate. Can we get a machine to communicate? I mean, they're fascinating issues. As I say, I got the worst grade of all my college years in that course, so it did not bode well for that being a future area of employment.
Do you think your classmates at the time could ever envision you actually being a successful game maker at those grades?
Well, again, every word in that sentence you just asked me assumes something that we didn't know back then.
Right.
That there was such a thing as computer games, or that there was such a thing as a computer game designer. It all just was, of course, at that point, it was just computers are huge, kind of government, military-oriented, number crunching machines.
I'm sure somebody back in '83 picked up Dino Eggs, looked at the name, and said, "That sounds familiar. That couldn't be David. He got the worst grades in class."
Maybe so. I do remember there were network computer games in those years, adventure games that you would clandestinely go onto the networks at college and play kind of the cavern games. But again, they were text-oriented. They were
right.
very, very, very primitive kind of, you're in a forest, and you see a little glimmer of light through the woods.
Right. Colossal castle, colossal cave and cavern sort of stuff.
That kind of thing, yeah. You go left or right or forward or back, that kind of thing.
Right.
All that.
Yeah, I was addicted to Zork when I was a youngster. Let's talk a little bit about Crisis Mountain, being that that came out first. What inspired you to make Crisis Mountain?
I came out of college and worked in radio for a year and a half and wanted very much to do, and did to a certain degree, a radio comedy, radio drama. I love the old classic golden age of radio and the narrative style which piques the imagination. I love the really great old-time radio comedians and some of the storytelling techniques that you can only do in audio. So I did for a couple of years do some public radio work and sold some comedy spots to All Things Considered and NPR and Morning Edition for a few years. But it wasn't really adding up to making a living in a way that in my young, impatient years was satisfying to me.
How old were you at this point? You were...
Well, just a couple of years out of college.
Out of college.
23, yeah, 23, 24, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw these home computer magazines. And again, with those old machines, VIC-20, Atari 400, then, oh my gosh, the Atari 800 has come out and has 16K of memory rather than 8K of memory,
yep.
That kind of thing. And I began buying a lot of those magazines and thinking, looking at the ads, looking at the reviews of the early games, and thinking, by golly, I could do something like this. So I went to the local community college where they had a computer lab with the very, very new Apple II computers. And I signed up for an independent study course at the community college just to get access to the computer lab. And I taught myself 6502 assembly language and began writing Crisis Mountain at the community college.
Was that a difficult?
No.
So your experience from earlier learning Fortran, that made it an easier transition going forward.
That's something that at least then, I don't know if it would come as easily to me now, being older, but it came easily to me then. Mm-hmm. I first tried to write some game code in BASIC, and then I quickly saw that just wouldn't be fast enough.
Right.
So then they had a book there for assembly language, and when there's a system that is logical and complete, I don't know, I take to it. It's like, hey, this is great. I like things that are logical and complete.
Makes sense.
Something about the language appealed to me, and it was pretty easy to learn. And also what I found very wonderful about that time was squeezing the maximum aesthetic effect through that little keyhole. And there were actually several tiny little keyholes. I'm using that metaphorically, the tiny keyhole of the 6502 assembly language where you can only change a tiny little set of pixels on the screen at a time. They can only be certain colors. You don't have a total control over each pixel color. They have to be coordinated depending on what's next to them. Of course, the sound abilities of the old Apple II were extremely limited. And of course, the speed of the processor meant you could only do so many things and keep the animation going at a reasonable clip of screen flipping. So those limitations, as a lot of people say when you're dealing with creative work, sometimes if you're creatively constricted, somehow you end up doing your best work because everything you're doing needs to be polished to get through that keyhole.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there was something about those limitations that really intrigued me, challenged my imagination, and really got me going. It was fun.
So, in essence, because you had these limitations, it would force you or the creators to push the machine or push your abilities as high as you possibly can get them to get the effect that you wanted.
Yeah, there's something about yeah, because you needed to try so hard and
Hmm.
just to get the grand effects that you wanted. And something
So
about that.
on the flip side, talking about today's modern gaming with the resources that are at programmers' disposals now, it seems that they're not using the full resources because a lot of the games that are coming out, as far as I'm concerned, don't do what you just say. The creativity is more, let's copy what was successful 3, 4 months ago rather than pushing the envelope and pushing this machine to its fullest abilities. If that was the case, I think we'd see a lot better gameplay today.
Well, it's so different also when I, an individual creative person sitting in my rented home room in Seattle, Washington at that time, could do something on my Apple II screen and know that if it got to someone else, that's exactly what they would experience. I mean, and games were not yet too complex for one person to do in its entirety. And so you get a kind of a direct mind meld, if you will, there, that just when you get into the politics of committees and businesses and game writing on a broad team basis, there are things that teams can do that an individual cannot. But the converse is also true. There's something about that pure connection where a game like Crisis Mountain or Dino Eggs, which may in today's market just be kind of considered maybe soft or odd or offbeat, at that time it was part of that amazing discovery of what is possible on this machine. What is possible here? All these new game paradigms were being discovered. It was truly
Right.
undiscovered country.
Those were good times. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me. Those were the best times for the games that were coming out. It was an amazing time. Uh, Now, personally, I didn't have an Apple II growing up. I had a Commodore 64. I think I must have burned that machine 3 or 4 times and got replacements. The power packs would go on me. I actually started with a VIC-20 first, but that didn't last long. I dabbled in programming in BASIC. Never really got far with it, but I did enjoy the language and I did enjoy doing what I did do with it.